And I will give you a short introduction about the goals of PICASSO and the objectives of this webinar, and especially the work in PICASSO on cyber-physical systems and Internet of Things. If you have problems with the sound, please tell me one way or the other. Yeah. Oh, this goes the wrong direction. Yeah, so what is PICASSO? PICASSO is a small European project, a so-called support action, and the mission of PICASSO was to enhance European and US collaboration in the area of ICT. And in order to achieve that, there are three pillars. The first one is about analyzing the possible collaboration topics, the drivers, needs, barriers, to promote funding opportunities, so to pass information to both sides, especially from Europe to the US side, to promote success stories, and is to do this especially to the industrial sector. For this, there is an ICT industry toolkit, which is available to download such information. And then PICASSO is not only a technical project, but it's also a project that intends to contribute to a policy dialogue between the European Union and the US, which has several facets. So one of that is to discuss policy gaps or over-regulation, policy issues that sort of are obstacles to scientific and technical collaboration, to inform decision makers by means of policy briefs, which point out certain issues, both from a European and a US perspective, and propose ways forward. And what you can also call an aspect of policy is to analyze in which areas there is the biggest collaboration potential between the EU and the US, and to propose mechanisms for such collaboration. And this somehow leads then to the third pillar, which is about putting forward and promoting strategic initiatives, starting the implementation of such initiatives, which I would say we have not gone very far. So we are more in the stage in the project about proposing such strategic initiatives, collaboration topics, possible joint funding schemes. Yeah, PICASSO consists, or let's say the technical side, the policy side, there are 4 different expert groups. There are 3 technology expert groups. One is on 5G networks, one is on big data, one is on Internet of Things, cyber-physical systems. And then there is a horizontal working group on policy issues like privacy and data protection, cybersecurity, interoperability, spectrum, assignment of spectrum has been discussed in a policy brief. And these two, let's say the technical groups and the policy groups, are interacting, so providing inputs to the work of, let's say, the other type of group. So I myself am the chair of the IoT and CPS group, together with Tariq Samad, who in the beginning of the project was with Honeywell and now is with the Technology Leadership Institute at the University of Minnesota, and Christian Sonntag, who is, let's say, the executive director of this working group. And Internet of Things and cyber-physical systems is a huge area. And what we did is that we somehow positioned our analysis, our work in the interface between Internet of Things and cyber-physical systems. Okay, so Internet of Things is very much about connectivity, being able to connect a large number of low-cost sensors to the cloud, to a central unit, to provide connectivity and middleware, such that enormous amounts of data, at least in principle, can be collected. But then from the point of view of cyber-physical systems of systems, and this is also recognized by the IoT community, comes the point where you have to ask the question, what do I do with the data? Okay, so to come from sensing to actuation, to close the loop, to have an influence on something. And let's say many of the discussed applications of Internet of Things are more on the business side, on the service side, but we focused on technical systems and especially also on large-scale technical systems. So the focus of the working group is on IoT-enabled cyber-physical systems, or as we have coined the term in another project before, cyber-physical systems of systems. Okay, so what we call cyber-physical systems of systems are cyber-physical systems, so you have an interaction between the computing world and the real world, technical systems, physical systems on the one hand side, but you have a large number of these systems that form what is called a system of systems, which is a system where elements may come and go, where you have dynamic reconfiguration, where there's a continuous evolution of the system by addition, by change of hardware, software components, and which can also show what is called emerging behavior, so that you have large-scale phenomena which are not obvious from the analysis of a few interacting systems. Famous example is the oscillations in the European power grid. And one aspect of these cyber-physical systems of systems is autonomy. Both, let's say, interaction between autonomous systems and human systems, interaction of several systems forming a large-scale systems. And during our discussions, we have concluded that this topic of autonomy of cyber-physical systems is sorry, I just looked at the chat. So that this is one of the promising areas for collaboration in the future. Okay, so you can see the members of the expert group here. So there are people like Martin Serrano, Ovidio Vermesan, who come from the Internet of Things side. Also Hayden Thompson, probably you can count there. And there are other people who have more a background in cyber-physical systems, like ourselves, like Tariq, like Chris Greer from NIST in the US. And we try to, let's say, provide some sort of a melting pot in terms of ideas and analysis here. Okay, so the goals of this expert group are to identify gaps, opportunities for research and innovation at this described intersection of Internet of Things and CPS, to analyze potential areas for European-US collaboration in ICT, CPS research and innovation, and to propose mechanisms how such collaboration could take place, and to support links between different networks, also to provide information about funding opportunities. The technical side and also the question of suitable mechanisms of PICASSO overall of the three areas, but in particular also of IoT CPS, has been analyzed in the opportunity report. When you registered before for this webinar, you got the link to the opportunity report, so maybe some of you have already looked at this. And we will give a little bit of an overview of the main areas that we have analyzed. And then in particular, we would like today to discuss what are the challenges in autonomy and to collect and generate ideas for EU-US collaboration in research and innovation. Okay, I don't want to hide that, let's say, when we started with PICASSO, the climate for collaborative development and research between the US and the EU was much better than it is at the moment. The current political climate, and this first in the US, but this also has a reflection on the EU side, makes it not so easy to find the right areas for collaboration. So our line of thinking is that probably collaboration should be mostly in the area of what on the European level is called low TRL developments. So more on the fundamental side, because in the area of more technical systems, the competitive or the competition between the two sides makes it difficult to start some sort of collaborative research. Also, the funding mechanisms are not so much in favor of it. Okay, that was a short overview, and next Christian Sonntag will provide you a short overview of the findings of this opportunity report that I mentioned before, and especially he will stress also the area of autonomous cyber-physical systems, which we think is one where future collaboration could be very fertile.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Christian Sonntag. I'm the manager of the expert group, and as Sebastian said, I will give a brief overview. I will keep it short. I hope I keep it short because we want to focus on discussion later. So what we did we did a lot of analytical work where we compared, for example, the drivers, the needs, the application sectors between the EU and the US, and that we then used as a basis to synthesize sort of the most promising technology areas and themes that we think are promising for EU-US collaboration. Originally, we came up with 6 different themes, which are shown here. I'm not going to go mention each sub-bullet point, but I'll just briefly go over them. So the first one is closing the loop in IoT-enabled cyber-physical systems, and this addresses the idea that was already mentioned before by Sebastian, that the IoT can be seen also as an enabler for large-scale technical systems. We have IoT-enabled sensors that produce huge amounts of data, and you want to use this information, this data to generate information, maybe even actions. So aspects that are shown that are relevant here are, for example, system-wide control, where the IoT, operation of technical systems based on data, architectures, and of course performance stability. The second theme sort of derives from the fact that all of these CPSOS systems, or many of them, are quite international. They may span several continents, and then it becomes even more difficult to provide interoperability between all of the different elements, especially if many of them are produced by different vendors. All of them have to interoperate. All of them are connected, or many of them are connected to the internet. And if you want to achieve this, you need some kind of approach for semantic interoperability. You need semantic models. What is very important is that you have open standards. There's a lot of activity in this area at the moment. Reconfiguration, infrastructure, and also architectures and cross-domain infrastructures. The third theme is sort of more the traditional CPS area of model-based systems engineering, which may not be sort of the hot topic at the moment, but is still, in our view, quite important if you want to make these future systems work. So here you were looking at integrated virtual full lifecycle engineering, where you try to develop platforms and workflows that help you design the system and operate the system, but also decommission the system all in one integrated platform, for example. We're looking at high confidence cyber physical systems, validation verification. And what is also very important, which will become much more challenging again, is models. If you now have cyber physical systems which are already complex, but then you integrate them with IoT systems, and maybe also with humans, which I'll get to later, then modeling will be of these huge systems will become an important challenge to address. The fourth theme is trust, cybersecurity, which is currently a very important theme, also politically, because trust is actually something that is crucial if we want people to accept these new technologies, especially we're talking about autonomy, for example, or maybe AI. So trust is going to be a very important topic. Cybersecurity as well. Cybersecurity as well will, of course, be very important to generate trust as well. So we need security, provable security, so that people trust these systems. So the subtopics here are, of course, fault detection, mitigation, trustworthiness, but also engineering focused approaches, something like you want to look at the behavior of a system to determine if it's trustworthy at the moment, or if it's safe, or if it has been compromised. And there's probably quite a big area where there's research and innovation needed. The fifth theme is autonomy and humans in the loop. So as Sebastian mentioned before, this is a quite important topic. I'll get to that in a second. And the sixth one is situational awareness, diagnostic and prognostics. So here the question now is, if you have all of this data from these thousands or however many connected sensors, how can you actually synthesize the information or the information you get into usable information, and then also present it intuitively to users that will be part of the future technical systems, so that they can make the best decisions, or they can understand in which state the system currently is. So these are the 6 themes. When we look at, then we use these to figure out which are the most important ones. And from our discussions and investigations, we believe that at the moment of these themes, autonomy and humans in the loop is probably most prevalent both in the EU and the US, while trust, cybersecurity, but also model-based systems engineering are seen as important as well, but not as important. So we decided to focus a bit more on autonomy and humans in the loop. And there are quite a lot of challenges that you could address in this area. The probably most important one is if you look at autonomy in large-scale complex open systems that are not domain or knowledge contained. So you're looking at a system and you're not even able to model completely how the system will behave or how the environment will behave. So this is, for example, if you look at an autonomous car, the car needs to be able to react to circumstances that cannot be predicted before. And how can you do that? One important technology that will become very important here is probably AI, artificial intelligence, which now is also sort of the dominant topic when we're talking about future research and innovation in the European landscape. So lots of activities going in this direction at the moment. And maybe if you've seen the Google I/O presentation, keynote, last week, I think, they showed the Google Assistant that was actually able to talk to a human person and make an appointment with a human person, and the human wasn't even able to recognize that it was an AI they were talking to, which looks quite scary. But this is also an excellent example of a system that has to operate autonomously in a not domain knowledge contained environment. So this is probably where it's going in the future. Then again, I mentioned before, trust is going to be crucial. So we need to be able to generate trust of people into, for example, it will be very difficult to convince people to drive in an autonomous car that doesn't have a steering wheel, if that's desired. So how can we actually generate enough trust in these systems so that people will actually accept them? Third aspect is humans. So we believe that in most cases, the systems will not be fully autonomous. So there will always be some kind of human interaction. Not in all cases, but in many cases. Sometimes it's, of course, very undesirable if you think about autonomous weapon systems. So there's a lot of discussion about this, that you cannot have a weapon system make the decision who to kill, for example. But also, if you look at industrial infrastructures, probably it will never get to the point where you don't have any humans in the loop at all anymore. So then the question arises, how will these autonomous or partly autonomous IoT-enabled CPS interact with humans? And how can we develop methodologies where humans and these partly autonomous systems collaboratively make decisions? Other aspects are, of course, engineering. This is still going to be an important topic, especially now if you're looking at combining IoT and CPS. So there are lots of reference platforms and architectures for CPS. There are reference platforms for IoT. But how can you actually integrate those into one IoT CPS system? So what are the engineering workflows, tools that you need? Models, as I mentioned before, are going to be very important, both of the autonomous IoT-enabled CPS, but also of the humans that interact with it. Another topic that's quite important, at least, and this is sort of our home turf, is optimal coordination. So if you look at, let's say, large chemical production site, you may have business units that are partly autonomous, so they make autonomous decisions. But overall, you want the overall production site to do the best possible thing. But this optimum may not be the same that the local business units or processes see as optimal. So how can you actually drive all of them towards the global optimum? And finally, this is something I talked about before as well. If you have lots of data, how can you actually extract the relevant information and also present it intuitively to people so that people are actually able to quickly and intuitively understand the state of a complex system, and in this way help them in their decisions. Then we looked a lot at barriers for collaboration. So as Sebastian said before, obviously in the current political climate, it's going to be very difficult to establish collaborations. We found that in some areas it's more difficult than in others. So for example, if you look at areas where there's lots of new players around, like in big data, where you have these big data innovation hubs in the US, they are a bit more open, although politically it's still difficult, but they're a bit more open to collaboration. But in other areas it's quite difficult. So this just means at the moment it's going to be challenging to establish concrete collaboration actions. I'll get to that in a second. But other barriers also exist. For example, there are quite a lot of structural differences between the funding environments. So in the EU, you have a lot of centralized funding via the framework programs, Horizon 2020 and later FP9. While in the US, you're looking at a lot of decentralized funding. So you have lots of agencies that provide funds. You may even have large companies that provide funds to universities directly. And here the differences are also in the technology readiness levels that are targeted. So EU projects usually cover a longer range or larger range of TRLs than the projects that you have in the US, and you somehow need to bring that together. And you have lots of other difficulties also in the timing and durations of these actions. Second barrier is administrative overhead and legal barriers. So if you want to establish a collaboration action, you're going to generate a lot of overhead, usually. So this has to pay off in some way. And the heavier, we call it heavyweight mechanisms, which are the mechanisms which are on a very high level, where you establish like huge joint collaboration programs. Those generate a lot of effort, and for this, it's going to be difficult often to justify, especially in the current climate, how this can be realistically done. Another problem that we identified is that you don't want to have too many legal requirements, because especially companies are often very resistant to signing complex legal documents that might sort of restrict them too much. However, there has been an implementing arrangement signed in 2016 between the EU and the US, which removes the requirement for US companies or for US project partners to sign the grant agreement. So this makes it a bit easier to establish joint projects or coordinated projects. Other difficulties are lack of clarity of the benefits of EU-US collaboration. I'll get to that in a second. Of course, IP is always a big problem. So any topic that is of high near-term commercial importance is really difficult for collaboration. So this means it's much easier to go toward the low TRL levels. There's a lack of joint EU-US funding mechanisms and policies. Export control and privacy restrictions might be a problem. And lack of awareness and knowledge. This is, of course, always a problem. So taking all of this into account, we came up with a number of different proposals. And in the end, we focused on two. The first one is sort of taking into account the fact that at the moment, the main goal should be on exchange, on technology topics, not really on collaborative research, because it's going to be really difficult to implement at the moment. So in the short term, we propose to establish a joint EU-US knowledge exchange initiatives that has two main drivers. First of all, we want to sort of keep the channels open and establish a regular exchange between the EU and US experts, to establish a common understanding of the challenges and of the needs, and also to determine the concrete benefits and synergies that collaborations would actually provide, because this is often not very clear. And this is actually needed to justify having all of these overheads that collaborations introduce. And the second driver is that if you think about the future workforce, STEM workforce, then a good education, a comprehensive education, will actually rely on international exchanges and collaborations. And this should be enforced as well. So some services that could be provided by such an initiative would be funding and facilitation mechanisms for knowledge exchange, and also a fellowship and student exchange program between EU and US research institutions. Some mechanisms that you could take into account, one is something like a temporary mechanism, like a successor CSA to the PICASSO project or other projects in this domain. But you could also look at a more permanent facilitation organization. For example, the IMS, Intelligent Manufacturing Initiative, is a permanent organization that facilitates collaboration and is funded both by the EU and the US. And this could, for example, be a template. So if you think about funding, of course, it would be desirable to have co-funding by the EC and some US counterparts, for example, or probably at the NSF or NIST. But we found that bilateral funding is at the moment much easier. So another option would be that you have one member state of the EU establish a bilateral collaboration or initiative with the NSF or NIST, for example, and then you try to extend it by inviting additional member countries into this initiative. And initially, you may be able to establish some EU-US cross-funding. For example, there are international industry associations like the IIC, and they are inherently international. They don't really care about national boundaries, so they might be able to provide cross-funding. But there are also some suitable national agencies in the US. And in the longer term, so here we're talking about towards Framework Program 9, which will come after 2020. We would propose to establish a joint program between the NSF and the EC for low TRL research and innovation in autonomous IoT-enabled cyberphysical systems. But here we're not talking about joint calls, but more about coordinated calls, where you have funding separated between the EU and the US, but you coordinate the calls and you establish collaboration mechanisms between the projects that are funded. And this, of course, could then be fed by the results of this short-term joint exchange initiative that I mentioned before. Okay, thank you very much. This is a very brief overview. I give it back to Sebastian now.
Yes, thank you very much, Christian. So, our target was to entertain you for about 30 minutes.
Sorry. Sebastian, can I just say something I forgot to mention before? This is for everyone. After the meeting, it will be available presentation and the recording of the webinar. So we will send an email around and providing you information on these aspects. Okay? Sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you very much. So now it is up to you to come up with some comments and recommendations. And in order to structure the discussion a little bit, I would propose to first discuss about the technological content. So what do you think about the topics? Do you think autonomy and, let's say, semi-autonomous human interactive systems should be a key priority, and what are the technological challenges? Secondly, maybe if you're interested in that, your view on the barriers to collaboration between the EU and the US. I don't know how many US participants we have here. I hope maybe there are some that can comment on it. And thirdly, what is your view on these proposals for strategic initiatives, and especially to, let's say, in the short run, focus on more science-based exchange mechanisms, and then maybe build on this in the low TRL area on this topic of autonomy. Practically speaking, if you want to say something, you can use this button. You know, if you look at your top menu bar, then you see on the rightmost, you see this hand waving button. You can use this to raise your voice, and then the manager of the telco or webinar will give you the mic. Or you can also type to everybody if you prefer to do so. Maybe it will be a bit difficult to process both kinds of inputs in parallel, but we will try to do our best. Okay, so with this, I open the floor to everybody. Any comments, suggestions, remarks?
So there's a question coming in via the chat. So
yeah, I'm seeing it. But you can also raise your hand and use the mic. If I may answer, you may all look at the question in the chat. PICASSO itself is not distributing grants. We have collected some information about funding opportunities, especially on the US side. Okay, so I don't know from which side of the Atlantic you're writing. What is largely unknown or often unknown is that also European researchers can take part in certain research initiatives, I think, for example, in DARPA, and collaborate with US researchers there. Also, there are some national programs that support this. Okay, so I know on the German side there are collaboration support. So it's not really doing research; it's more supporting joint research by travel money, etc. Between Germany and the US, and this is one of the reasons why Christian had on his slides that for this kind of light collaboration, probably using national funds is also an alternative to EU money. Between the EU, you may know how the EU funding works. So the EU works by calls, and then you are free. I mean, also Christian mentioned this. You are free to include partners, for example, from the US, without EU funding in proposals. And the way to integrate them has been facilitated. But apart from that, for let's say funded collaborations, you need a call in one of the European research frameworks. Such calls exist, for example, with Brazil, with Japan, in the area of Internet of Things. But this is very specific, and if I can be honest, at the moment, at least in certain parts of the Commission, there is not a big enthusiasm for joint research calls with the US. Okay, from APRE, can you reply to the raised hand?
It's open, it's open.
I'm not sure.
It's open. The microphone is open.
Mr. Van Leer, can you hear us? Can you talk? Oh. So I cannot hear you, unfortunately. So
You have to enable your mic in the top bar of the screen.
I hope that I've done that now.
Now it's better, yeah.
Okay. Thank you for this webinar. I fully support you with your choice for the autonomy as a main topic within PICASSO. But I am questioning two things. The first thing is the choice to combine semi-autonomous with autonomy, because within the United States they are really doing research and looking into the part of autonomy with no humans in the loop. So the question could be, when you are going backwards, if that is the right decision for the coming years. And the second part is the Americans have a very strong framework in which they are positioning autonomy, and they call that the autonomous system has to be self-configuring, caring for its healthcare, and has the possibility to optimize itself and also can protect itself, because the discussion in the United States is also really connected to all kinds of weapon platforms. So I think there is a different loop also in the research possibilities. And the next question is, can you cut loose the topics of security, interoperability and collaboration from autonomous systems when you are looking into cyber-physical systems or systems within the Internet of Things? That were my two questions.
Yes, I think you can have different views on this, and outside the military area, I think for quite some period in the future, full autonomy will not happen, or it will happen quite slowly. And so that in many areas, from cars to, let's say, production units, there will be humans who ultimately are supervising semi-autonomous or partly highly automated systems. And to me, a crucial aspect is how to switch from the autonomous operation to a human taking measures, interacting with the system, maybe disabling some functions, controlling the system, and how to do this kind of a smooth transition. It's an obvious problem in autonomous cars because there, at least up to now, one relies on a driver being present and being able to take over if there's a suitable alarm. But I mean, in practice, I guess that's relatively complicated. So I think one can have the view that, let's say, limited autonomy is not the full future, but I think on a medium-term horizon, combination of human control and autonomy will be what is actually happening. And also, I think that's a research topic which has the advantage to be very interdisciplinary. Okay, so you also need people who understand human reactions, perceptions, etc., etc. And it is something which is like, I mean, you can also say like full autonomy is still very much on the basic research level. Okay, so there are many fundamental questions that should be answered.
Sebastian, there are two questions in the chat. One from Karilaus and the other one from Thomas. Do you see them?
Yeah, I see them, yeah. I think to the first question, yes, I mean, practically everybody will make a transition from less complex systems to more complex systems. So I think what we presented was not meant like saying that one should only start with hugely complex systems. Yeah, to the other question, I cannot say. Maybe Sinan Turner can say something from also from a US perspective. In the EU, there are different views. Okay, so I have been involved in a number of discussions in the framework of the Artemis platform, and there the point of view was very much that Europe should focus on itself and its own competitiveness. Okay, so to develop European platforms, European technology that can compete with the US technology, and from that point of view, the interest in having joint R&D that really leads to technology was relatively limited. I don't know how this is seen on the US side, but at least I would guess that from the present administration, it is the same point of view that one would not be too interested in sharing technological developments at the moment. No, Sinan, we cannot hear you. You should, okay. Now you will give him the mic.
So Sinan, I've given you the mic. I hope you can now speak. Okay, so you can configure it at the top. Maybe you see this mic icon at the top.
Where is that?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, all right. Okay, okay, all right. Thank you. All right. So I totally agree with the comments earlier. So in these days, with the current administration and America First policy of the administration, I don't think that there will be too much desire or incentive to get into collaborative research with, especially at the government level. And there might be still some collaborations between universities on an individual basis. This is going to be determined on a case-by-case basis based on the researcher's desire to collaborate with his or her counterpart in Europe or vice versa. But getting funding for joint research, I think, is going to be a little bit of a uphill battle with the current administration to invest in joint research with European counterparts, because universities these days are having quite a bit of trouble getting research funding from the agencies. So expanding that to international collaboration is going to be quite limited at least for the time being. I mean, things may change in the future. I don't know how when I say future, whether it's short-term future, mid-term future. But currently, I think collaborative funding opportunities are going to be very limited or non-existent from my perspective.
Professor Van Vlier, can you go on? You're enabled now to talk.
can you hear me now? Yes.
Hello?
Listening to the last speaker, it seems that within the European Union and the PICASSO project, the collaboration with the United States will be a problem. And what I'm also seeing is that the United States and Europe are not the only countries who are heavily funding in this kind of technological development, because in China we can see the same development, maybe even a bigger development, and maybe it could be a question if also the European Union has to wait for the collaboration only with the United States, and if they have to make their own position in this kind of development on the topic of autonomous systems between the two bigger countries next to us. But I don't know if that is also a part of the research for the PICASSO project. But when it is not so, then an advice to the European Commission could be in its place, I think.
Yes, the mission of PICASSO was, because the project will end in June, to foster collaboration between the EU and the US. But I think you're absolutely right that this is not the only direction one can look. And maybe there are alliances which are, at least at the current point in time, at least as promising. I have read the chat comment that there is big opportunities to collaborate on a city level or state level in the US. Can you say a little bit more about which areas are addressed by this city or state level funding or initiatives?
Can you hear me? This is Sinan Tmer.
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. Well, I did not make that comment. I mean, I did not send that comment in the chat box, but one comment I can make to a response to that comment in the chat box is there's a lot of interest from the local governments for smart cities. I mean, lots of large cities are interested in getting into smart city concept. And yes, I agree that there might be some opportunities to collaborate, but in terms of funding, it will be still very, very limited. So I think that kind of collaboration can be done only if both sides fund their investment and their research mutually exclusive of exchanging money across the Atlantic. So I agree with that comment that smart cities can be an opportunity for joint projects. On the funding side, I still keep it to my comments I made earlier.
Yes, I mean, this is also something that we found that the best, let's say the max you can expect at the moment is probably in most cases that are really technologically relevant, that both sides fund the research on their side or the developments, and then there is some sort of collaboration. Sinan, how would you characterize smart city projects in the US? So what is the dominant topic there? Because smart city is a very broad concept. It goes from more customer-friendly city administrations to management of energy systems, freeways, disaster management, crowd management, surveillance, if I may make a neutral term for that, use a neutral term for that. So what are the
Okay.
topics that you have in mind there?
Okay. Can you hear me, by the way?
Perfectly.
Okay. All right. So, yes, I agree with you that the smart cities is a very broad topic. I think in general, cities are interested in digitalization of their operations, using the technology more and more. For example, collecting data from the traffic lights to monitor the traffic, or disaster response systems using the IoT technology. Those are the kinds of things that they would like to do. Basically, it is more digitalization of the cities, and of course, I mean, from the political side, they would like to improve the quality of services they deliver to their citizens. And mobile applications like interactive applications that collecting information and data from the citizens and compiling them in a central hub. For example, if a traffic light is broken, or a lamp in the city is broken, or there is damage on the road, so the people, individuals can report those kinds of problems back to the city, or from the safety and security side, if there is some suspect of criminal activity. People from their smartphones can easily communicate with the police, with the security agencies. So, in terms of applications, there are so many opportunities, but the key point is how to digitize the services, how to collaborate interactively with the citizens, so that the citizens can participate in the city operations by providing data. I think that those are the areas that cities will concentrate. And I think there is a perception that smart city applications are more advanced in Europe than US. That's why for that reason, there might be opportunity for the municipalities to get into collaboration with their European counterparts to digitize their services and cities.
Yeah, so what I just typed, for a single city, the Atlantic is quite big. And so if I think it's a very interesting idea that we have not pursued so far, this interaction on the city level. But in order to make this happen, I think one needs a sort of associations of cities, maybe regional, maybe state-wise, I don't know. And the same on the European side, because let's say the relative cost of interaction for a single city is probably relatively high, unless they already have a partnership. For example, Dortmund and Pittsburgh are connected.
Even before the technology, there has been quite a bit of collaboration between cities. When I travel through Europe, at the entrance, besides welcome, there is a sign that we are a sister city of some city in the US or other countries. So there's already that kind of social interaction between cities. So that kind of interaction can be expanded to more technological collaboration if the sister city, for example, has implemented some smart city applications. So, the existing collaboration and relationship between cities can be expanded to technological collaborations as well. That's one way of identifying the city which to collaborate.
The European, or let's say maybe German attitude towards this is always, yes, it is very nice to do something if somebody pays for it. Okay, so what cities are doing who are doing smart city projects is always asking for some funding, which can then be state, national, European funding, etc., etc. Is there similar mechanisms in the US so that there is a chance to set up something jointly?
Well, I don't think that, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe any city would put some funding in their annual budget to collaborate with another city in Germany or France or in Europe. So that kind of, again, the funding side, I think, should come from respective cities, but one side is very unlikely to support the other side.
No, that's what I mean. But you see, if I look at in one of the reports of the PICASSO project, there is a long section on smart cities, and I don't know what about 100 smart city projects that have been analyzed. But of course, let's say the buzzword of smart city is a mechanism by which the cities support funding outside, third-party funding, in order to go on with certain developments. Okay, and so if you have a chance to do joint development that is funded by somebody outside, then this is always something which is, let's say, relatively easy to do. And in Europe, this kind of funding exists. And so my question is, are there similar opportunities for cities in the US to get support for this type of smart city projects that could then include some aspect of collaboration? So not one side funding the other, but just you have projects on both sides, and there is an additional budget available in order to collaborate, exchange information, experience, technology, etc.
I mean, my personal opinion is that kind of collaboration will be kind of, I mean, will be in the sense of one city visiting the other city across the Atlantic and getting some ideas and analyzing what they have done, maybe sharing some technical advice, so on and so forth. So the funding on the for the city would be probably covering the travel cost of the people visiting the other cities to get some ideas. I think that would be the extent of funding I would say would be available.
Yes, but that's something which is already happening.
Right.
So the mayor of Dortmund has just recently visited Buffalo
Right.
and Pittsburgh because, and also people from the university took part in that. But I think if we talk about EU-US collaboration, then one would like to, and in the EU there is a lot of funding available for cities together in a consortium in order to develop, or let's say, to implement elements of smart cities. And my question is whether there's a comparable support for cities in the US that could then maybe combine.
Well, I mean, I'm not aware of such funding. Maybe this is something that our project can propose in the final report. But I'm not aware of because I'm not an expert on smart cities. Yes. I know a lot of people in the smart city area where I get some ideas. But from the funding side, I'm not aware of any particular funding available for such activity currently.
Sebastian, there is a question on the chat from Chris Wood.
Sorry?
There is a question in the chat from Chris Woods on PICASSO lasting impact. Is the last comment here? Can you see it?
Yes, I have seen it. Yes, there is a toolkit by the PICASSO project that provides information about funding of research, especially in Europe. I have just asked Christian to provide a link or the exact name of that. Okay, so that was. So if you look at the chat, you see this web link,
Yes,
and
it's
this
called
is an information
Crossroads,
platform that PICASSO has set up.
and it's also
Yeah.
available for mobile devices, so you can download it for iOS and Android as well. If you go to this page.
Yeah, and also this is supposed to live also after the termination of PICASSO. Okay, so as a resource for information, this will be maintained at least for some period of time. Ricardo, could you give the mic to Jacques Cruz Bandano?
So you should already have the mic, so maybe it takes a
It's
while for
open.
it to become active, looks like.
I'll try again. 1 second.
Now we hear you. Perfect.
No?
Now we can hear, Jack.
Jack?
Now we can hear you, so please go on.
Jack, you can try to open your microphone on the top of the screen, please.
Now it's better. Hello? No?
A bit louder, please.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me now?
It's still very soft. If you could somehow either speak louder or
Maybe
crank
this
it
way?
up.
Hello? Hello? No.
Jacques, go on this bottom and
Good.
adjust microphone volume. You should be okay.
Does it work now?
So, I mean,
Very quiet. Yeah.
Okay. The idea of the smart port comes from here from the city of Hamburg, as we saw that there are similar interests from different ports in the world. So I could imagine if there are some cities with interesting ports and interested in smart cities and smart ports, which would love to cooperate with other ports in Europe.
Yeah, it sounds interesting.
Hello? You can hear me, no?
Sebastian, there is another question in the chat from Professor Stavros. Oh, this is difficult. Ntalampiras.
So I'm showing a slide on our second annual Transatlantic Symposium that will take place in June. So if you go to our website, to project events, you will be able to register very soon. So
Yes, I think we will have a session on cybersecurity, but also on other topics. There will also be a breakout session on autonomous systems. So if you want to attend, that will be possible, and we will also be very happy if people from the US who are interested in that topic will attend. And also, if you have a particular interest, let's say we can help you screen the funding opportunities on the EU side, but in a certain way, this is something you can also do by yourself. I'm always not so convinced about it is more or less available because in the EU the funding opportunities are program based, and so the topics are known and you can easily find out, I think. Okay, any further comments, hints, what one could do, how one could collaborate? I think the hint to do this on a city level and that there is maybe more openness and interest was very useful, and an aspect that we so far had not considered very much, and that somehow bypasses the competition problem in the core technological areas between the US and the EU. I want to get... Okay, so maybe you have a look again at the proposals for strategic initiatives. So on the short term, what we propose is to have more a knowledge exchange. One has to think about how to fund this. It is something which is quite common on the national basis. Maybe it could also be done on the European level. And then secondly, the question is whether we can achieve that, for example, the topic of autonomous IoT-enabled CPS is funded both by the European Union and National Science Foundation. But the problem there is that already the funding principles of the EU and the National Science Foundation are quite different. Okay, so National Science Foundation funds basic research. That there can be limited industrial participation, but it's not aiming at actually bringing developments to the market, whereas in Europe there's a big pressure to do so. So whether the European Commission in the ICT area is interested in low tier L research and innovation projects, I would say is not so clear. Okay, so are there any further comments, hints, suggestions? If not, then thank you all for participating. Thanks to those who have left already. We will keep this open for a while if you want to type, but we will not repeat reading all our slides.
Okay. Thanks a lot to everyone. First, to the two speakers, which were making a very good and interesting presentation. Secondly, many thanks to the participants who participated. Sorry for the joke. Very actively. And as I said before, in a short period of time, we will send you an email saying that the recording and the presentation will be available in the PICASSO website. So again, thanks a lot to everyone, and have a nice evening, or at least for European ones.